little bit about me. We're getting started here with Black History Month. And that's kind of, for a long time, that was like a double-edged sword for me. You know, we, as a people, and I think about African-American people, and when I was in school, we would get history lessons, and we would get history lessons about Black history. But the history was about the start of us as a people in the United States. And that start usually involved being slaves. A very painful past, and still a very painful past even for our country. I still don't think that we've gotten over the atrocities of slavery, how it divided the country, and how it pits us against them. But as I was getting older, I would always wonder about, was there something about us as an African people before slavery? Who were we? You know, where did we come from? You know, okay, we came from Africa. But even all the pictures that I got from Africa was either the people that were in, like, I guess, grass skirts and, you know, throwing spears or whatever. And then the history that was great, like the Egyptian history, those were usually, those were made to look like white faces. So it kind of gave me the idea that the Egyptian history was not, even though Egypt was in Africa, and that's something I didn't even find out until later, that Egypt was a part of Africa, that still wasn't a part of my history. That was painful for me, but after a while, I started to study on my own, started to learn different things. And one of the books that really made an impact on me in my life was the autobiography of Malcolm X. I would recommend anybody to read that book. It's a very good one. But Malcolm X got into a lot of the psychology of racism and a lot of the psychology of us as a people, as a black people. He read a lot of books, and one of the things that I learned from that book was when he read something, I so admired who he was and who he was as a human being, as a person. I wanted to know what he knew. I wanted to learn what he learned. I've never been a type of person that just accepted what people said to me, or what people told me. If somebody told me how something was or how it was supposed to be, hey, where did you get that information? So even today, I want you guys to ask that same question of me. Where did I get that information? Because there's going to be, all of us have a circle of knowledge. And in that circle is just what we know. But there's a vast amount of knowledge that's outside that circle that we don't know. And there's a vast amount that we can learn. So I'm going to share some ideas with you today that might be out of your circle of knowledge. But I would ask you to just, one, keep an open mind, and two, if there is something that does not jive with you, don't dismiss it. Check it out. If you want to refute it, check it out. Find the things that can refute that information. Okay? Malcolm X was a Muslim. I grew up Christian. So reading his book, I got a window into a different religion that I had never gotten before. And what I noticed was that there was a lot of similarities between Islamic thought, and Christian thought. Okay, sorry, I gotta move. All right. So I started to wonder, it made me start to wonder if there was some similarities. Why were there similarities? And where did they come from? So it made me want to get to the essence of what religious teachings was, because I had a suspicion that they all had a common ancestor, so to speak. And that's where Egypt came in for me. Now, there's a gentleman by the name of Robert Bauval that basically talks about a land before pre-dynastic Egypt. And a lot of things we now know today come from pre-dynastic Egypt. But he says that pre-dynastic Egypt probably owes most of its history and knowledge to a people that were long before pre-dynastic Egypt. Probably 10,000 to 15,000 years before. So that's his idea. There are other people that say that the civilization that we know of as Egypt was called Kemet. And Kemet was people say it was called Kemet because it was the Black Land. It was the Black Land of the Nile, and when the river flooded, I guess the soil was black. Now I kind of have to wonder, why would people call themselves after just a black soil and not be talking about themselves? But that's a whole nother story for me. There are other people, so the civilization of Kemet is a lot older than the conventional Egyptologists have talked about. So the conventional Egyptologists say that Egypt's civilization started about 6,000 years ago. One of the odd things about that is that the pyramids were there. So you talk about a civilization that was able to build pyramids 6,000 years ago, but today we don't even have the technology to do that same thing. If there is nobody that can build or lift, no technology that we have that can lift those megalithic stones. So I have to question, if Egypt started then where is the knowledge and where did it come from that they were able to build the pyramids, started at the height of civilization, and then deteriorated from there? Okay. There's another gentleman by the name, I had a picture of the Sphinx, and there's now a whole lot of different, they don't even call themselves Egyptologists now. They call themselves chematologists, okay? To acknowledge that there was something that was before what the Egyptologists are talking about, because a lot of them has actually tried to push that information down and tried to keep it out of mainstream. But a gentleman by the name of Robert Schoch took a look at the Sphinx. And the Sphinx, he said, had weathering that was from water. Now, why is that a big deal? Because the Sphinx is sitting in the middle of a desert, but it had been weathered for so long. Thank you, Jerry. If you look around these edges here, around the edges of the Sphinx, you see that a lot of the sand has different indentions and it's rounded off. Well, that means that there had to have been a lot of water or rain or something that weathered that for a long time. I mean, we're talking about stones. We're talking about hard rocks. Okay, it had to weather for a long time. So paleontologists say that the Sahara Desert, or the desert that this is in, really began about 10 to 12,000 years ago. Okay, so the Sphinx had to be there before that to have been weathered. How long? Well, a lot of people are saying that the Sphinx is probably about, they're saying this, the Egyptologist says about 6,000 years old. There are other people now that are saying that the Sphinx might be as old as 50,000 years. Okay? Which would throw the Egyptologists and the conventional Egyptologists and our history, our human history, just throw it completely out of whack. What do you mean 50,000 years ago? Okay? So know that the odds are, the possibilities are, that we're talking about a civilization that started of probably 60 to 50 to 60,000 years ago. Okay. Now, I want to talk about the Comation spiritual wisdom. Okay. And the Comation spiritual wisdom If we're talking about, and we're talking about a civilization that's 50 to 60,000 years old, there is much wisdom that comes out of that. That we basically today, we look at Egyptian society as primitive. And I just want to give you a framework so I can talk about one particular idea, but give a framework of Egyptology or chematology. Now this picture here is a picture of a place that's outside of the Nile Basin and where the river was. It's called Nap de Playa. The reason why this is of interest is that these are megalithic stones, so they're huge. And nobody knows who built them. Okay? Now, what those megalithic stones are is basically a map of the stars on Earth. Somebody built a map of the stars. So you can literally watch certain stars when they're rising. You can look through this little piece right here and make a clock or map when a certain star is getting ready to rise. Okay? Now, that might not be a big deal. You know, I mean, we can probably look up at the stars and map something out. But this primitive society, or so-called primitive society, built these megalithic stones and made this what people now look at as an observatory. Outside of the picture, there are other stones that coincide with these. Okay? They end up being maps or stones that represent different points in the sky. We did not know, what it ended up being, when they built this observatory, they made and put the stones to scale, or put the stones to the length of the stars, the distance of the stars, and they mapped it to scale. In other words, we just, in the last 20 years, or maybe 30 years, but we just were able to gauge the distance of stars, how far they are in light years. Well, these stones at Nap de Playa are exactly the number, they put them the number of light years away back over probably 50,000 years ago. Am I making sense of what I just said? That they basically mapped, had the distance of the stars, and built this observatory to scale. It is a literal map. Okay? So they knew something. How did they know it? Because that's what we're trying to figure out now. We're saying that they're primitive until we reach a certain level of knowledge and consciousness. And then we figure out they knew something that we didn't know, that we just figured out. How? That's deep. Yeah. That's deep. I got to laugh right there because I always say that in class, and my students always now, oh, that's deep, man, that's deep. They're just bumping each other. So I have to laugh a little bit about that one. But so that knowledge that they had is just, to me, a tip of the iceberg of knowledge about other things that they had, and a knowledge about spirituality. They had a huge, grand idea about. I'm moving, Emma. Okay, hold on, right there. Okay, so they had a lot of knowledge about, I guess, the afterworld. The Book of the Dead is something that people look at now. And one of the things, in talking about the framework, that Egyptologists have said is that Egypt had a belief in many gods. They did. Egypt had a belief in one, that there was one all-encompassing, whatever you want to call it. We call it God, but they had a belief in one encompassing idea of what the universe and everything came from. Okay? Not too different from a lot of ideas today. All right? what they ended up having, what we see now is this idea. So this is like the pantheon of, I guess, of Egyptian gods, or what people have called gods. But what they are called, the word is called netter. Okay? So each one of these is a particular netter. But it didn't mean gods. It meant an aspect of the Creator, an aspect of God. Okay? So each one of these was an aspect that they were trying to put in some kind of form that they could teach others. Because a lot of this knowledge, the Egyptians or the Cometians had two levels of knowledge. There was an exoteric and an esoteric. So it was called the lesser mystery and the greater mystery. The lesser mysteries was about what was happening on earth. So it was talking about the ideas about earth and how things worked on earth. Then you had the greater mysteries that went into the metaphysical. Okay? These were representations of the metaphysical, the greater mystery. And if you'll notice, they always have the gods or the netters in pairs. They always had a feminine energy and a masculine energy. Always. Okay? It was a representation of a bigger idea. Okay? Now, let's see. Hopefully this will work. So just one simple little idea to talk about, to look at really a lot of the heritage that we have inherited from the Cometian wisdom. So the bigger idea. So we got a masculine and a feminine. So Geb and Nut are, Geb is representative of the earth and Nut the sky. Okay? So got a masculine and feminine energy. Now probably you've heard of Osiris, Isis, and Horus. The Egyptian called them Aset, Asar, and Heru. So one of the main ideas that they had was that everything comes from the one. How would this be represented? Okay, so we got the one. Okay, let's make that a little dot. So everything comes from the one. Everything that is and ever was, ever will be, comes from the one. Then the one wanted to experience something. Okay? The Egyptians or the Cometians call this feminine, the passive, or this the passive energy, and then this the passive and the active. Okay? So we came from the one, and then we got a passive and active energy. In order to create anything in the universe, that passive and active energy has to come together. So we might be talking about something sexual here, or the idea. Now, I'll explain here a little bit why that is important here also. But the passive and active come together and create something in the universe. Okay? Here, we're talking about the basis of the Trinity. So this one major idea that permeates anything in creation is one aspect of this. Okay? Now we're talking about this would, I guess, would be something considered in the higher mystery. Then we have Aset, I think I'm spelling it right, and then Asar. And they created Peru. So when they came together, these two aspects ended up creating Heru. This is called the father and father of all netters. So meaning that everything, that this netter can be represented in anything. Okay? So any aspect of creation. All right? Now, so that's one simple idea that they represented that takes on a whole nother, all kind of other big ideas that ends up being passed down to us as something religious. Okay? One of their other big ideas that they had was an idea of correspondence. In Egyptian thought, Kemetic thought, correspondence was the idea that something that was, well, hold on a minute, I want to make sure I get this one right. Okay. So it infused their art, philosophy, science, everything. It was a part of that. But correspondence is the idea that the mental, material, and metaphysical universe is all connected. It's all one thing. All right? So another way to say that is what you see comes out of what you can't see. So the invisible universe contains the template of our reality. So everything that we see, everybody that's in front of us, it came out of the invisible. Okay? What you see is a representation of what you can't see. Look at this marker. This marker came out of something. It's real. We can touch it. But what did it come out of? How was it manifested? So what you see, it comes out of something that you can't see. Okay? Another way of looking at that is what you see is the form. This is the form of the substance. Okay? The known represents the unknown. Probably heard the term as above, so below, saying the same thing. Or as on earth, as it is in heaven, saying the same thing. Okay? So that's the idea of correspondence. Is that making sense? Am I explaining that? Okay? So correspondence. So what I want to do is to come with an idea. Yeah, I like that. I like that. Thank you. Jareba, girl, you are just so on point. But to an example for this correspondence is this is the temple of Luxor. Okay? When they built anything, I won't say anything, but when they built their temples, the temples were usually representative of something. This temple of Luxor, what people discovered later, was actually a representative. It was built to represent the parts of the human body. To where when they built the head, there was 12 pillars in this part of the temple right here. Okay? Temple. Okay? There was 12 pillars. It all represented nerves that run through. I think it's called dendrites. Somebody can help me with this. Is it dendrites? Okay, thank you. That the 12 dendrites in our skull, or in our brain. Okay, and how they connect. How did they know that? Okay. They have megalithic stones. The walls, like right here, is the knees. Okay? At that point where they built that wall, they literally, most walls, if you look, they have a 90-degree angle. You see two edges put together. They have megalithic stones that literally curve. There's not a 90-degree angle there. Okay? It literally curves and it represents the knees, how the knees work. Okay? So, in other words, they represented man in their building, okay, in their art. It was a correspondence. Everything was a correspondence. So this comes to the idea that I want to speak about today in particular. And it's the idea of correspondence and talking about the idea of Christ. So I had spoken a little bit about this before. That idea came out of Egypt. Okay? And it came by way of the Gnostic Christians. Okay? what we have here is a painting of a ritual that is part of Egypt. And the ritual is they are putting together, somebody has died, and they are mummifying them. Okay? Now understand, again, and we're talking about the idea of correspondence. The mummy now becomes a symbol. Okay? It's died. But they wrap it up in this long cloth, and then they put oil over it. Okay? Oil it up. And what they're trying to do is make the mummy an indestructible body. The Egyptians looked at us as people, as individuals, as all a spark of the Creator. We're trapped in the body. Or that spark is trapped in the body. Okay? So now this person has died. This mummy becomes a representation of the person now leaving the body, or the energy of that person, the ka of that person, the soul of that person, now leaving the body. They end up preparing it, and they call it a mesu. The mesu means anointed. So they oil it up, and they oil the anointed, or the anointed with oil, the mesu. Now imagine the mummy being laid out. Okay? What they end up doing is at some point, and what you see here, they elevated the mummy. Elevated or resurrected the mummy. Okay? That was symbolic of the soul leaving the body, and then that spark now being free. That spark now leaving and getting ready to unite back with the Creator. It is an idea about transformation. You transform from a physical form to now you're a spiritual form, and now you get to go back. It's a process still, even after that happens. It's a process that happens that you still have to go through. But that form that they call they call it Asahu, S-A-H-U, Sahu, which meaning that it is a spiritual body. You're now a spiritual form. These ideas is where when it was passed down through the Gnostics, some of it they just didn't quite understand. Some of it they ended up taking what's called the lower mystery and the higher mystery, fusing it together and making one story, which ended up basically a lot of it ended up not making a lot of sense. Okay? But the transformation, or they call this mummy the KRST. Okay? The KRST was again, it was the representation and of that person transforming. And then now they lift or elevate the KRST or resurrect the KRST. The Sahu then is still hanging around the body. They're literally reading to him, reading to that the Sahu that's still hanging around. So it hasn't totally left and went on its journey yet. So it became everybody had the ability, or everybody at some point was a KRST. All of us has the ability at some point to transform. All of us has the ability to do that in our lives every day. To transform. To become a KRST or a Christ. Not just one individual that we're all supposed to emulate or be like. Everybody knows when you're trying to be like somebody else, it's just about impossible. Okay? But transforming yourself, being who you are, that authentic individual that you are, now that becomes power. It empowers you. So I would ask you today, when you're talking about going through your life and you're looking at your life, recognize that what you see is a representation of what you can't see. Your life is the metaphor of the soul. Christ is the metaphor for transformation. Every day you have the opportunity to be Christ. You have the opportunity to transform. Know that when you are transforming, it's not the end of something, it's the genesis. Every day you can start anew. That to me is the power of the myth of Osiris or Osar. Later, Osar became El-Asar-Rus. Take the E off. Okay? Lazarus, that was raised from the dead. So the African wisdom is that you have the power within you to transform every day. It never ends. It's a genesis every day. All right. Thank you very much.